All right, so a bit of a preface before I get started. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just narrate the entire story to the best of my ability. There'll probably be some like edits and cuts, just because it's my first time doing this. I'm not sure if this will be a regular thing, but I don't know. I kind of just want people's thoughts on it, and I figure they'll be more likely to read it if I actually, read it aloud like an audiobook. The PDF will also be attached in the description if you guys want to read it. So 3 days ago, me and my friend, we challenged each other to each write, short stories. And what we did was I gave him a prompt, he gave me a prompt. His prompt was something like, I don't know, like a cop stops the wrong car, gives the wrong car a ticket, something like that. I don't strictly adhere to that once I actually get to like the part of the story where that happens. But it's along the same lines. There's definitely a cop involved, but it's not what you. I don't get. It's definitely not. I don't think what he expected me to write, given the prompt that he gave me. I kind of go in a pretty like dark direction. I guess it gets. I guess this is kind of a viewer discretion warning too. It does get pretty violent towards the end, but it's not in a way that romanticizes the violence or anything like that. I think it's done um, fairly tastefully, and it's done to serve the point of the story, which I think will kind of reveal itself to you as I read it, and you maybe read the PDF or whatever. But just a slight, reader discretion. It does get pretty violent towards the end, and it's right at the last section. It's right at part 4. So whenever part 4 happens, just know like it's gonna get pretty heavy. Another thing too, this is like really fresh. It's definitely like rough draft, first drafty type material. So there's a lot of pros and edits and things that I still need to make. And part of the reason I want to read it aloud is to just get feedback and see where I can make changes. So any feedback is welcomed in the comments below. So yeah, I guess without further ado, I probably could have said more, and there's probably things that I'm forgetting, but without further ado, I guess we can get into it. I'll start narrating. I'm not sure. I may cut to, depending on how many audio edits I have to make, I may just do this over a black screen or try and find images that are like, yeah, I think I'll do that actually. I'll do it. I'll just throw in some like still images that are kind of like related to whatever, visuals I'm describing in the short. So I'll do that. So this is maybe, unless I do something at the end of the video, this should be the last time you see my face in this video. I don't want that to sound dark. Anyway, yeah, let's get going. Part 1. Pit stop at a gas station. From the center row, middle seat of his father's parked station wagon, Danny, aged 5 or 6 years, stared intently at the windshield before him. The incandescent glow from the bulbs above struck a rather particular streak of amber across the frosted glass. The wipers trudged their way through the sleet, squeaking and squilling as worn wipers often do. To the inattentive eye, each pass of those wiper blades would have appeared the same. However, Danny seemed to be picking up on the infinitesimal, minute mutations that emerge when things of the world repeat themselves. He couldn't quite pinpoint what these mutations were, but he was mesmerized by them, nevertheless. Danny's mother sat in the passenger seat. His eyes would turn to her occasionally. She positioned herself in such a way that she could use the lap of her thigh as to prop up the novel she was reading. She was wearing a Columbia fleece jacket and lounge shorts, which the bottom of her jacket extended beyond by some length. Short shorts and a jacket. If Danny were any older, he might have intuited that there was an irony in that. Periodically, she would go for a sip of coffee. Without looking up from her novel, she'd guide her left hand over above the thermos that sat in the cup holder. She'd net her fingertips around the top of it and pull it from its place in the world. Each time, a couple of light dings and metal shimmerings would occur as she unevenly lifted it up. Once secured, she would crane it over to her lips, and this time was different. Just as the mug was about to reach its destination, Danny's mother lost grip on it for a split second. The mug plummeted into the valley that formed between her thighs and the stomach. It did not tilt one way or the other precipitously. It remained upright, somewhat. But the fall and subsequent impact was enough to send a few spare drops of coffee flying into the air, briefly illuminated by the amber glow of the lights above. Amber on amber, Danny might have thought, if he were any older and could somehow, some way, possibly have registered the ephemeral movement of those droplets. The droplets went in all different directions. A few splattered the frosted windscreen, a few hit the driver's side seat that remained empty while Danny's father, presumably, shopped around in the gas station they had been parked outside of for some time now. And a couple of fairly obtuse droplets speckled the foxing pages of his mother's novel. "Whoops," she said, almost inaudibly. She turned her head back to Danny, and they reciprocated a smile. She knew he had probably noticed. A handful of seconds later, after some cleanup, things returned to their natural rhythm. The thermos sat undisturbed. Lily, Danny's mother, continued to read on in her short shorts and Columbia jacket, and Danny continued to look for things to observe. He was not thoughtfully going about his expeditions as some scientist or philosopher would have. He was simply a child fixated on the patterns that things of the world seemed to follow. Even his mother taking a sip of coffee, something that seemed to have no discernible pattern, might have some frequency that, if he stared long and hard enough, he just might tune into. Part 2. The Highway. Lily was young for a mother. Her and Jack had had Danny when she was 19. She was now approaching 25. She's beautiful, Jack would often find himself thinking. And she was. She was very beautiful. It was the little things, the way her blonde locks fell in just the right way to build a frame that accentuated the youngness and tenderness of her face. The way she had pranced around the house with an oversized t-shirt on, the way she had laughed, cried, whispered. It was all these parts that summed up to a person that was nothing short of angelic in Jack's eyes, and, probably, most men with an affinity for the opposite sex. Jack was 23 when he met Evangeline. The place where they first met was an old diner, just off of some highway not too far from some town that was located right smack dab in the middle of nowhere. It was a fluke, chance, serendipity. But life, and henceforth love, often happens that way. She had been a waitress before Jack found her, not for long, maybe 3 or so months. She started immediately after high school with plans to save up and eventually achieve higher educational status. Jack, on the other hand, was in the business of special deliveries. He was on his way to El Paso to secure a deal. When Evangeline, Jack's future river lily, first asked him what he wanted for dinner, Jack was hauling about 10 kilograms, around $300,000, of hard rock cocaine in the back of his trunk, just underneath that trap door where one usually keeps a spare tire and a pump jack. He made a good living, enough for the both of them. And so it was, small talk here, a question there. They made each other laugh. That's the thing. Rarely do people genuinely laugh with one another. It's typically one of service and reciprocity or one of the other things, but these laughs, they were pure. There was something magical about their connecting with one another. It just worked and they just clicked. About 10 minutes into Lily being Jack's waitress, she became his friend. She sat with him. They talked. Soon, perhaps too soon by common judgment, Jack revealed what he did for work, and Evangeline did not bat an eye. She smiled and said, "Tell me more." She was hooked. Maybe it was his subtle but honest smile or the way he calmly and smoothly transitioned from one topic to the next. She didn't know, but he was enthralling to her. And it wasn't because she thought that she could get something out of him or from him. She didn't really care about the money or any of that. If she could put her finger on any one thing, it had to have been Jack's stories. Jack had story after story after story. The depth of his experience in matters both legal and illegal was indefinite, and each and every one of his tales was as entertaining, if not more so, than the last. And the best part about each of them was that they were all true. His eyes did not waver. He did not tug at his collar or scratch at his neck or cup his palms. He just looked at her like she was a fellow man and spoke to her like an old friend that she hadn't seen in a little while. She had dreams of being a writer. Most of her first month's paycheck went into purchasing a second-hand beat-to-hell Apple II computer. She graduated with the class of 1986. The Apple II had been going strong for about 9 years up until she could afford one. As soon as she acquired it, she went to work. She wrote poem after poem, short story after short story. When she wasn't waiting tables or brewing coffee, she was reading book after book and writing works of her own. Lily sometimes described Jack's stories to Jack as brain fuel. While she never directly used or repurposed any of Jack's stories, they definitely had an indirect effect on her productivity and willingness to write. After Jack made his way back from that special delivery in El Paso, he visited Lily again like he'd said he would. He stayed over at her apartment that was not more than 12 or so miles from the diner. They talked and talked, and Lily even read him a few of her poems, which he did not laugh at or mock. There was no reason to. They were truly great works of fiction or abstract emotion or whatever they had been. Jack enjoyed her as much as she enjoyed him, and he sought to be with her if she would have him. And she did. They made love that night. They had not done that the first time they'd met. In fact, Jack did not even kiss her, though, admittedly, he wanted to. The next day, Jack paid the remainder of Lily's lease in full, around $3,000 in cash. They then went and purchased a 1985 Mercury Colony Park station wagon, also in cash. Shortly after, they bought a small, compact camper trailer, fitted with a shower and wash basin and something that resembled a toilet. Their station wagon had enough room in the back to house a fold-out queen mattress, so a larger camper trailer was not necessary. They had all they needed, and they had each other, and in around 9 months, they would have their first child. About a month before Daniel was born, they decided to settle down somewhere. They bought a single-wide trailer fit for the three of them and planted it on an acre of land right outside of Shreveport, Louisiana. Lily would stay at home and tend to Danny and write, and Jack was home most days too. He only had to make deliveries once a month or every 2 months sometimes. They lived happily and quietly and peacefully and kept to their own. When Danny turned 5 years old, they planned to take him on a road trip to celebrate the occasion. On January 21st, 1992, they departed. They took with them only a few things. They had intended to only be gone for a week or two at the most. Lily grabbed a handful of books and her TRS Model 80-100 portable computer, which they had first bought not too long after their station wagon days. She packed Danny a few toys and maps and books. She took with them all the necessary things that a mother would think to bring on such a trip as this. Jack packed lightly and did not carry any parcels related to his line of work. He brought a couple of pairs of jeans, a 44 Magnum, though he did not intend on having to use it, a few shirts, a leather jacket, and a layered puffy coat, some flannels, and a few sticks of beef jerky. This trip, which would lead them through a series of gas stations and sites and vistas and highways and interstates, would ultimately culminate at one highway, indistinguishable from all the others. It's at this highway that all three of them would fall victim to the infinitesimal, minute mutations that often occur when things of this world repeat themselves. Part 3. A Letter to Autumn. By the time they had left from the gas station, the sun had begun to rise. They had left Shreveport around 3 hours prior, circa 4 a.m. They had hoped to make it northwest by the afternoon. Jack was used to driving long, inhuman hours without stopping for more than essential gas. The 16-hour trek would be trivial for him. Their destination was Durango, Colorado. Lily had hoped for Jack and Danny and her to board the famous train that ran from Durango to Silverton. She had only ridden it once before when she was not much older than Danny was then. The memory stayed with her until approximately 11:05 a.m. on that day, January 21st, 1992, a day not unlike all the others. Jack had switched the wiper blades off sometime after the sun had melted away the frost. Soon after, Danny's eyes grew tired from all the observations he had made and trivial spectacles he had witnessed, and he fell fast asleep. They had another 14 or 15 hours ahead of them until Durango, but in actuality, they had another 3 or maybe 4 hours until they all reached the great ultimatum, the destination that all of us at some time, or maybe another, will arrive at. For the time being, though, they were where they were. It was simply them and the road before them, and they carried in that 1985 Mercury Colony Park station wagon all their dreams, all their hopes, all their ambitions. It was all there in that nondescript vehicle. About 15 minutes after the gas station, Lily tilted her head up from her novel for the first time since she dropped her mug. Her and Jack had gotten so comfortable around one another that they could just do that, go for long stretches of time without talking. They could sense each other, and they were fine just being in each other's company. "Jack," she said with an innocent and thoughtful cadence. "Yeah," he responded with genuine curiosity. "Can I read you a poem?" "Sure," Jack said. "Did you write it?" He looked at her, and she nodded back. On the floorboard in front of her, there was a tote which she kept her books and things in. Her portable computer was down there as well. From the tote, she pulled a small spiral sketchbook. This was her poetry journal. She flipped forward a few pages, paused, and then she spoke. "It all falls, without notice, often sudden and exact. Autumn rain." There was silence for some time after she had spoken. Lily contemplated asking Jack what he thought of it. She could see that it had an effect on him that she did not intend. "Your poem is good," he said. "It just made me think is all." "Thank you," Lily said. She leaned in and kissed him on his cheek. She could taste the salt from the solitary tear that had made its way down his face just moments prior. After a few moments of contemplation and an eventual arrival at serenity and contentment, Jack's river lily went back to her natural ball form and began reading once again. Part 4. Mutations. The next couple of hours were plain and uneventful road trip there. Lily had fallen asleep some time after the 200-page mark. Not too long after, Danny awoke. He didn't say much upon his resurrection. He just yawned a big hearty yawn that you see some kids do, and then he gazed out the window to his left in an attempt to find something to look at. Danny would often read signs as they passed them. He was an excellent reader for his age. He knew words like flabbergasted and meretricious and tyro and nascent and much, much larger and obscure words that most men do not even know. And he would occasionally use them in his sentences, which his mother was silently surprised by. One such sign, a sign not unlike all the others, read simply and tersely, "Speed limit, 65." Jack had set the cruise control to 70. He figured that would be all right. ... Ellipsis. Some time has passed. On the page, there's just an ellipsis indicating that some time has passed. So, yeah. Anyway, without further ado, let's get back into it. He figured Jack had set the cruise control to 70. He figured that would be all right. They were a couple of hours away from the Texas-New Mexico border when it happened. It's on the outskirts, the fringe of the world, that the mutations become more apparent and noticeable. In the vastness of the bluffs and the plateaus and the dirt, this is where they tend to happen. In the belly of jungles, in the rivers of the Congo, the heart of darkness. The inevitable departure from what is understood and normal tends to emerge and make itself known. Every now and again, a poor soul or a handful of them stumble upon such happenings and are caught in the crossfire. The following is one such case. Around 10 minutes after the speed limit sign, they passed a highway patrol car, clocking it at around 70 miles per hour. Barely a second afterwards, the patrol car's siren lights flipped on, accompanied by a quick burst of high-pitched, oscillating tones. Jack looked into his rearview, saw the car fastly approaching him, checked his speedometer, let out a grunt of disagreement, and then he gradually came to a stop on the shoulder of the highway. The area surrounding them was completely void of life. There was nothing but dirt and bluffs and sky for miles and miles. Every now and again the strong wind would spurt up a small dust tornado or send a dead bush hurling into the vastness. They were miles upon miles away from civilization and culture. The cop encroached upon them. Jack watched the figure from his side mirror. He could not make out a head or a face. At this moment, it's unclear that the cop even existed as humans exist. He seems to have been some sort of entity brought forth by the universe to keep it in balance, or, perhaps, imbalance. But Jack assumed none of these things. He figured it was just your normal, everyday cop, one that was not unlike all the rest. After all, it did appear that way. Jack began to crank his driver's side window down once the cop had reached the tail end of their 1985 Mercury Colony Park station wagon. He rolled it down about halfway. Just around the same time, Lily awoke. Her son turned her and watched as she yawned. She scanned the road ahead of her and piecemeal registered that they had come to a stop some time prior to her awakening. "Jack," she said. "Cop," he responded. She turned to look behind them and saw the patrol car, which did not appear any different from all the other patrol cars she had seen throughout her lifetime. In her periphery, she saw the cop approaching from Danny's driver's side window. A closer inspection, perhaps fueled by her motherly instincts, revealed that the cop's left hand was gripping an unholstered handgun, just at thigh level. Jack had not noticed. "Jack, drive. His gun is out. Drive!" She yelled a blood-curdling yell. Jack had never heard Lily scream like that, and the content of what she had said did not register with him quick enough. The cop had arrived at Jack's window. He aimed the gun through the gap and pointed it directly between Jack's eyes. Without a moment of hesitation, he pulled the trigger and blew Jack's brains out. They splattered in much the same way the coffee had before, though there was much more of it. The bulk of Jack's head's insides painted Lily's face and seeped their way into the tank top she was wearing underneath her Columbia jacket. She could not even react. She just sat there, frozen in time, staring into what was left of Jack's skull. The cop began his slow, gradual approach to the opposite side of the vehicle. He was almost in front of the hood of the car by this time. Danny did not know what to think. His mouth was quivering, but he did not cry and he did not scream or anything that you would expect a child his age to do. He just observed what was happening, but he could not make any sense of it. Lily began to sob. She cupped her mouth and turned her head, and she saw it. She wasn't sure what it was, but it, in fact, was not human. She stared into the black void where she had assumed a face and eyes to be, but she found none. In the blackness, she saw the heart of the cosmos. Her subconscious picked up on a similarity between it and Jack's insides and the coffee mug and the frost which she too had noticed and the amber glow and everything else she had ever seen. She connected all sorts of dots, and they amalgamated to this chaotic whole that she could not comprehend. Her door opened. The cop pulled her from the vehicle. If she had not seen the void, she might have been of a semi-sound mind and put up some sort of struggle in an attempt to get away from the thing which appeared to be a cop in all parts of its body except its head, which was comprised of the stars. The figure dragged her by her upper arm once it had freed her from the vehicle, and her bare legs scraped against the asphalt. She was still in some sort of trance as a bulk of the skin from the balls of her feet were peeled away like potato skins. The cop slumped Danny's mother over the hood of the vehicle so that her head was facing Danny. Her chest pressed against the hood of the car, and her arms were sprawled out. Lily's waist contorted around the bevel of the hood, and her legs, which were severely damaged from the drag, were spread almost from headlight to headlight. She looked around, gasping for breath and searching for some sense of reason in this unreasonable world, and then she saw it. She saw Danny in front of her, and he looked back at her. She suddenly remembered who she was and what had just transpired. She dared not to gaze to her right because she would see the carnage again. She just locked eyes with Danny for a brief moment. Then she felt the grip of the thing's hands go around her forearms and push her into the hood. Then she felt her shorts slide down to her bloody ankles. She was completely vulnerable to it. She heard the sound of a belt unclasping and could hear the microscopic infinitesimal noises of the thing's pants sliding down. She felt it penetrate her, and she screamed. Danny watched. He felt he was a prisoner restrained by a 1985 Mercury Colony Park station wagon's middle row center seatbelt. He felt he was suffocating and he could not handle the weight of the observations which he'd been forced to witness. But he did not turn away. He felt that if he turned away, he would still see it. This concludes short story number 1 by Josh Bird.